The ghost from the past. The night was quiet, too quiet. Commander Ethan Drake sat alone in his cabin, sipping a glass of whiskey. The stars outside his window twinkled like tiny specks of hope, but Ethan felt none of it. He had spent years trying to forget, trying to move on. It had been a decade since he left space behind. No more missions, no more secrets, no more regrets. At least, that's what he told himself. Then his peace shattered. A loud beep echoed through the cabin. The communication screen flickered to life. Ethan frowned. Nobody contacted him anymore. The screen showed one message, a voice message, from Zara. His heart stopped. That was impossible. She was dead. With a shaking hand, he pressed play. The voice that followed sent a chill down his spine. You buried the truth, Ethan. But I found it. And now I am coming for you. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. This had to be a trick. Maybe an old transmission. Maybe someone was messing with him. But deep down he knew. Zara was alive. And she was coming. His past, the one he fought so hard to forget, had finally caught up with him. Ethan grabbed his old datapad and pulled up the mission logs from 10 years ago. The last time he saw Zara. She was an alien unlike any other. A warrior, a scientist, and once his closest ally. But he had betrayed her. He had left her behind on an uncharted planet. No rescue, no way out. She was supposed to die there. Ethan exhaled sharply. If she survived, it meant she knew the truth. And if she knew the truth, she would never forgive him. A new beep interrupted his thoughts. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a signal from orbit. A spaceship had entered Earth's atmosphere. And it wasn't human. In a secret military base deep underground, alarms blared. Unknown vessel approaching. One officer shouted. It's not responding to hails. General Carter, a man with sharp eyes and a colder heart, leaned forward. Who does it belong to? The officer hesitated. Sir, it's sending out a name. Carter's fingers tightened. Whose name? The screen blinked. Ethan Drake. Carter's face darkened. He had hoped this day would never come. Send a team, he ordered. Find Ethan Drake. Bring him in. If that alien finds him first, we're all in trouble. Ethan had already packed a bag. He wasn't going to wait for Zara to knock on his door. He had to run. But as he reached for his gun, his cabin shook. A powerful boom erupted outside. He ran to the window and froze. A ship, sleek and alien, had landed in the clearing near his home. Its metal hull shimmered under the moonlight, covered in strange symbols he hadn't seen in years. The ramp lowered, and she stepped out. Zara. She looked different, stronger, more dangerous. Her violet eyes glowed in the darkness. Her black armor gleamed, built from technology far beyond human reach. She wasn't the same desperate woman he had left behind. She was something more. Something terrifying. Ethan swallowed hard as she stopped a few feet away, staring at him. You should be dead, he finally said. Zara tilted her head. You should be ashamed. Her voice was colder than the wind. Ethan clenched his fists. I did what I had to. Zara stepped closer. And now I'll do what I have to. Ethan reached for his gun. But before he could even lift it, she moved. In a blur, she was in front of him. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it. Pain shot up his arm. The gun clattered to the ground. Still so weak, she whispered. Ethan glared at her. What do you want? Zara leaned in, her eyes locking onto his. I want justice. Her grip tightened. And I want you to remember what you buried. Ethan felt his stomach twist. Zara had uncovered the truth. And she wasn't leaving until she made him pay. The secrets beneath the surface. Ethan Drake was still breathing. That, in itself, was a miracle. The last time he saw Zara, she had been reaching for him as the ship doors closed, pleading, screaming. dying. Now she stood before him, alive and furious. Her violet eyes glowed in the dim light, filled with something deeper than anger, betrayal sharpened into steel. Ethan's wrist throbbed where she had grabbed him. He didn't reach for the gun again, not because he didn't want to, because he knew it wouldn't matter. Ziara was faster now, stronger now. And worst of all, she was here for a reason. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to bury him in the truth he once buried himself. The wind howled through the trees. The scent of ozone lingered in the air from her ship's landing. Ziara tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she had already solved but still despised. "You still lie to yourself, don't you?" she said, her voice smooth but sharp. Ethan didn't answer. He had spent years trying to erase the past. What was the point in speaking now? But Ziara wasn't interested in silence. She lifted a small device from her belt and pressed a button. A hologram flickered to life between them. Ethan's heart stopped. It was his own voice. A recording, one from 10 years ago. "They can't know the truth. We erase everything. No records. No survivors. That's an order." The air turned ice cold. Ziara stepped closer, her shadow stretching across his cabin floor. "I found the ruins," she said, her voice steady. "Too steady. The ones you tried to hide." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You don't understand." She cut him off. "I understand perfectly." The stars above seemed to flicker as tension crackled between them. Ziara took a slow breath. Then she whispered, "You erased my people." Ethan had no words, because she was right. 10 years ago. A mission. A discovery. An order he wished he had never followed. His team had landed on Zira's planet expecting barren wastelands. Instead, they found a secret buried deep beneath the surface, a lost civilization. Advanced. Intelligent. Alive. They weren't supposed to exist. They weren't in the records. The moment Earth's government found out, the order was immediate. Destroy all evidence. No exceptions. Ethan had hesitated. For 1 second, he had considered saying no. Then he had pressed the button. The ground had trembled. Fire had swallowed the sky. And the screams, they still haunted his dreams. Only one survivor had made it out. Ziara. He had left her behind, believing the planet would swallow her too. But she had survived. And now she had returned, not as a refugee, as the reckoning. Ethan swallowed hard. "Ziara, listen." "No." Her voice was final. "Now you listen." She stepped forward, pressing a small holodisc against his chest. It activated instantly. The world shifted around him. Suddenly, he was no longer standing in his cabin. He was standing in the ruins of the past. The hologram wrapped around him like a cage. The sky burned red. The buildings crumbled. The screams of the fallen echoed. Ethan flinched as he watched himself, his past self, standing on a hill, watching it all happen. Ziara was in the hologram too. She had been there the whole time, crawling, bleeding, trying to escape the destruction, trying to reach him. And he had turned his back. The hologram faded, but the weight in his chest remained. Ziara stepped back, watching him. "Now," she said softly, dangerously, "do you still think I don't understand?" Ethan didn't answer. Because for the first time in 10 years, he had no lies left to tell. Above them, the sky rumbled. A new signal flashed in the corner of Ziara's ship's console. She turned slightly, reading it. Her expression darkened. "Looks like your people are still afraid of the truth," she murmured. Ethan followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. Incoming warships. Earth's military had arrived. And they weren't here for Ziara. They were here to silence them both. The forgotten betrayal. The night sky burned. Ethan Drake stood frozen as Earth's warships descended from the heavens like metallic vultures. Their sleek black hulls reflected the moonlight, casting shadows that stretched toward him like long fingers. This wasn't a warning. This was a silencing mission. Zyara's gaze flickered upward. Unlike Ethan, she didn't freeze. She had been waiting for this. She turned to him, voice calm but sharp. "Now you understand, don't you?" Ethan's fists clenched. He had always known Earth's government was ruthless. But they weren't just coming for her. They were coming for him. He was no longer their soldier. He was a liability. The ships hovered, their weapons locking onto Zyara's vessel. A crackling voice came through Ethan's communicator. "Commander Drake, step away from the alien." Ethan recognized the voice. General Carter. The same man who had given the order 10 years ago. The same man who had told Ethan, "No records, no survivors." Ethan's blood ran cold. He had obeyed back then. He had followed orders. Now he was the target. Carter's voice came again. "This is your final warning." Zyara looked at him, waiting, testing him. Would he step away? Would he obey again? Or would he finally make a choice of his own? Ethan exhaled. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He grabbed Zyara's arm. "We need to leave," he said. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Now you're starting to sound like someone worth saving." The chase begins. Zyara's ship roared to life. The engines flared, sending a wave of heat across the clearing. Ethan sprinted inside right behind her. The ramp closed just as the first blast of plasma fire scorched the ground where he had stood. The ship lurched as Zyara slammed her hands onto the controls. "Hold on," she said. Ethan barely had time to brace himself before the ship shot into the sky like a silver bullet. Behind them, the warships gave chase. Explosions rippled through the clouds as they fired. Zyara's fingers danced over the controls. "They really don't want you talking, do they?" Ethan gritted his teeth. "They don't want you talking." She smirked. "Then let's be loud." The ship spun through the atmosphere, dodging the oncoming blasts. But Ethan knew the truth. No matter how fast they flew, they couldn't outrun Earth's reach forever. They needed a plan. And Zyara had one. The Forgotten Vault. Minutes later, they were off-world, floating in the cold abyss of space. Ethan was still catching his breath when Zyara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't come here just to confront you," she said. "I came here to finish what you started." She reached into her belt and pulled out a data key. Ethan recognized it instantly. His heart stopped. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Zyara's eyes burned with a dangerous fire. "From the ruins," she said. "You buried everything, Ethan, but you forgot to bury this." Ethan took a step back. His mind raced. That data key, if it contained what he thought it did, was the last surviving record of the lost civilization. The proof Earth never wanted to be found. The proof that humanity had wiped out an entire species. And now Zyara had it. "You don't understand," Ethan said quickly. "If they find out you have that, they'll—" Zyara cut him off. "They already found out, Ethan." Her ship's console flashed red. An incoming transmission. Ethan's stomach twisted. Carter's voice boomed through the speakers. "Return the artifact, or be destroyed." Silence hung in the air. Zyara's fingers hovered over the console. She could respond. She could fight. Or she could do what Ethan had done 10 years ago. She could run. Ethan swallowed. His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Zyara turned to him, and for the first time since she arrived, there was no anger in her eyes. Just resolve. "I'm going to make sure the truth is never buried again." Then she punched the hyperdrive, and the universe exploded into light. The chase begins. The universe ripped open around them. Zyara's ship shot through hyperspace, leaving Earth's warships far behind. Stars stretched into long, thin lines before snapping back into place. Ethan Drake gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles white. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated in his bones. His heartbeat hadn't slowed since they had left. His life on Earth, gone. His past sins, catching up. And beside him sat the one person who had every reason to kill him. But Zaira wasn't thinking about revenge, not anymore. She was thinking about war. A new battlefield. The ship's control panel flashed red. A warning. Ethan's stomach dropped. They tracked us. Zaira's hands danced across the controls. Of course they did. A second later, the ship lurched out of hyperspace, slamming into normal space. A gas giant loomed in the distance, its swirling storms the color of old blood. But Ethan barely had time to register the planet, because directly ahead of them floated a derelict space station, rusted and broken, hidden deep in the void. Zaira maneuvered toward it, gliding through the wreckage of abandoned ships. Ethan frowned. Where the hell are we? Zaira smirked. A graveyard, just like the one you left behind. She brought the ship into a docking bay. The metal groaned as the ship connected. Ethan tensed. We don't have time for this. Zaira turned to him, her violet eyes gleaming. You still think this is about time? She held up the data key. And suddenly, Ethan knew. This wasn't just a hiding place. This was where the truth would finally come alive. The truth that should have stayed buried. The air inside the station was thin, stale. Lights flickered weakly overhead. Zaira moved quickly, navigating through the old corridors like she had been here before. Ethan followed, his unease growing. He had seen plenty of abandoned stations in his time, but this one felt different. It felt haunted. At last, they reached a massive chamber. A console sat in the center, covered in dust and age. Zaira knelt before it, plugging the data key into the system. Ethan watched as holograms flickered to life around them. And then they saw it, the history that had been erased, the people that had been wiped out, their cities, their voices, their faces. Ethan's breath caught. He had helped bury this. And now it was staring back at him. Zaira whispered, "They were never a threat." Ethan swallowed hard. Then why? Because humans always destroy what they don't understand. Her voice was bitter. Ethan clenched his jaw. That's not true. Zaira looked at him, really looked at him. Then why am I the last of my kind? The words hit harder than any bullet. The war comes to them. A sudden explosion rocked the station. Ethan barely had time to react before the walls shook violently. The lights flickered wildly. Zaira's ship erupted in flames in the docking bay. Ethan turned to her. Tell me you have another way out. Zaira exhaled sharply. That was my other way out. The station's long-range scanners blinked to life, detecting multiple inbound ships. Ethan knew before he even looked. They found us. Zaira's expression darkened. Let them come. She pressed a button on the console. A signal shot out. Ethan's stomach twisted. What did you just do? Zaira smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I told you, Ethan. I'm done running. Then she turned to the screen and watched as her message, her proof, was broadcast to the entire galaxy. The truth that should have stayed buried. The signal had been sent. There was no turning back. Zaira stood tall in the dim glow of the console, her violet eyes locked on the holographic projections around her. The faces of her people flickered in the air, ghosts of a civilization long erased. And now, for the first time in 10 years, the universe knew the truth. Ethan Drake clenched his fists. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as the distant hum of approaching warships vibrated through the station's decayed metal walls. The storm was coming, and they were trapped inside the eye of it. A signal that could not be unheard. The broadcast had spread far beyond Earth's control. Across the galaxy, news feeds blinked to life, showing the evidence of genocide. Cities turned to dust, alien bodies buried beneath ruins. The desperate cries of a species wiped from history. The reaction was instantaneous. The Galactic Senate, long thought to be under Earth's influence, was forced to respond. Neighboring civilizations, once silent, now demanded justice. Earth's dominance in the galactic order had been shaken, but they weren't going to fall without a fight. Nowhere left to run. "Brace yourself," Jara muttered. She wasn't even looking at Ethan anymore. She was watching the warships descend. The station shuddered as plasma bolts rained down from above. Sparks erupted from the walls. The floor trembled beneath them. Ethan turned to her, breathless. "Tell me you have a plan." Jara didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a rifle from the rack beside her and tossed him one too. "You still know how to fight?" she asked, her voice cold. Ethan caught the weapon. His fingers wrapped around the grip out of instinct, memories of his old life flooding back. "This isn't a fight we can win," he said. Jara smirked. "That's what you said last time." Then she kicked open the doors and walked straight into the firestorm. The betrayer becomes the betrayed. The first wave of black-armored soldiers breached the station, moving like shadows through the broken hallways. Ethan recognized their tactics, their precision. These weren't just any soldiers. They were his old unit, the same men he had once commanded, the same men he had once called brothers. A voice crackled through the radio. "Drake, stand down. You don't have to die for this. General Carter." Ethan pressed his back against the wall, gripping his weapon. His mouth was dry. "Do I sound like a man who wants to die?" he muttered. "Then step away from the alien," Carter ordered. "Surrender. We can make this disappear." Jara turned to him, her expression unreadable. This was it, the moment of truth. Would he run? Would he betray her again? Ethan exhaled, his fingers curled around the trigger. And then, for the first time in 10 years, he made a choice. He raised the rifle and fired at his own men. No more chains. Jara was already moving, lightning fast. Her plasma blade ignited with a hiss, slicing through the first soldier before he could react. Ethan took down another with a precise shot to the leg, sending the man crashing to the ground. They fought side by side, an unspoken rhythm forming between them. Soldiers fell. Smoke filled the air. The station walls trembled from the relentless bombardment outside. Then, suddenly, silence. The last soldier collapsed. Ethan was breathing hard, his hands shaking, but he was still alive. Jara wiped the blood from her blade, turning to him. "You hesitated," she said. Ethan swallowed. "I didn't." She studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. Not in approval, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. The last stand. A new sound rumbled through the station. Jara's eyes narrowed. More incoming. Ethan checked the scanner. His stomach dropped. "They're sending a destroyer," he said, voice hollow. "They're going to wipe this entire place off the map." Jara's grip tightened on her weapon. "We have one chance," she said, "but you're not going to like it." Ethan exhaled. "I haven't liked anything since you showed up." Jara grinned. "Then you'll love this." She grabbed a detonator from her belt. Ethan blinked. "Tell me that's not." She tossed it to him. "You wanted a plan. Here it is." Ethan caught the detonator, staring at it like it might explode in his hands. Because it would. It would bring the entire station crashing down, and take everyone with it. Jara held out her hand. "Are you ready to finish what you started?" Ethan looked at the device, then at her, then at the warships descending to erase them both. He made his choice. He pressed the button. The final stand. The detonator clicked, and the world began to fall apart. A deafening boom erupted from deep within the space station as explosives detonated in a cascading chain reaction. Metal beams snapped like twigs. Fire swallowed the corridors. The floor beneath Ethan Drake's feet lurched violently, tilting at a sharp angle. He barely had time to react before gravity failed, and he was thrown into the air, falling into the fire. Ethan crashed into a railing, gripping it tight as debris rained down around him. Sparks and smoke filled the air. He coughed, eyes stinging. Somewhere through the chaos, he heard Zara's voice. "Move, human." A flash of violet and silver. Zara leaped through the crumbling wreckage with inhuman speed, sliding across a broken walkway as it collapsed behind her. Ethan forced himself to move, leaping from the unstable platform just as it snapped apart, tumbling into the fiery abyss below. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back, staring at the ruptured ceiling above him. The station was dying, and they were still inside it. The destroyer arrives. A shadow loomed over them. Through the fractured hull of the station, Ethan could see it. A colossal Earth destroyer, descending through the black void of space, its weapons locking onto what remained of the station. A voice crackled over the comms. "General Carter. You're out of time. Drake, you should have taken my offer." Ethan's fingers dug into the floor. He had once taken Carter's orders without question, once believed that following orders was the only way to survive. Now he understood the truth. Survival wasn't enough. Some things were worth dying for. Zara pulled him to his feet. "We need to leave." Ethan's eyes darted to the wreckage. "We don't have a ship." Zara smirked. "You really think I came without a backup plan?" She pressed a small device on her wrist. A distant roar shook the station. And then, a second ship appeared from the debris. Sleek, fast, armed to the teeth. Zara grabbed his hand. "Run. Escape or die." The hull ruptured behind them as the station broke apart. The blast doors leading to the ship slammed shut just as they reached it. Zara cursed under her breath. Overrides locked. Ethan looked at her. "What's plan B?" She exhaled, then drew her plasma blade and stabbed it directly into the control panel. Sparks exploded. The doors groaned. Then, with a shudder, they slid open. Ethan didn't hesitate. He bolted inside, Zara right behind him. The moment the doors sealed, she launched the ship. Outside, the station finally collapsed in on itself, a final explosion sending debris scattering into the void. But they were already gone. The warship fired. The plasma blast barely missed them. Zara spun the ship in a dizzying maneuver, weaving between the wreckage. Ethan clung to the seat. "You call this flying?" Zara grinned. "I call this winning." She hit the thrusters. The ship jumped to light speed, and the warship behind them vanished into nothing. For the first time in hours, silence filled the cockpit. Ethan exhaled. His hands still shook. They had survived. But for how long? The universe reacts. Zara leaned back, staring at the controls. Then she turned to him. It worked. Ethan frowned. What worked? She gestured to the console screen, where a galactic-wide transmission was still playing. The proof of Earth's crimes. The erased civilization. The betrayal of an entire species. It had already spread, and it couldn't be stopped. Ethan swallowed. You just started a war. Zara's expression was unreadable. No, human. I just ended one. The beep interrupted them. An incoming message. Ethan's chest tightened. Carter. Zara shook her head. No, someone else. She opened the transmission. A new voice filled the cockpit. Calm. Cold. Zara of the Lost. Commander Drake, you have our attention. The screen flickered, revealing an unknown alien species. Ethan's breath caught. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't a government he recognized. This was something new. Zara leaned forward. Who are you? The alien's glowing eyes narrowed. We are the ones your kind tried to erase. And now, we're coming back. The transmission cut. Silence. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I really hate cliffhangers. Zara grinned. Then you're going to hate what happens next. You can't erase the truth. The message still echoed in Ethan Drake's head. We are the ones your kind tried to erase. And now, we're coming back. He sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at the blank screen. His pulse still hadn't slowed. Zara leaned against the console, her violet eyes locked onto him. "You look like a man who just saw a ghost." Ethan exhaled. "I think we both did. Because if that message was real, if the lost civilization wasn't entirely lost, then everything was about to change. For Earth, for Ziara, for the entire galaxy, and for him. There was no going back. The ghost's return. A sharp beep pulled them both from their thoughts. Incoming transmission. Ziara hit the controls. The screen flickered. And suddenly, they weren't alone. A fleet had emerged from hyperspace. Massive, ancient ships drifting through the void like forgotten gods. Their hulls were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, glowing with an eerie silver light, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then came the voice again. "You call us ghosts, Commander Drake." A figure appeared on the screen, a being with glowing, crystalline eyes and skin like shifting mist. Tall, hollow-cheeked, watching him like a judge watching a criminal. Ethan swallowed hard. Who are you?" The alien blinked slowly. "We are the Forsaken." The word hung in the air. And then Ziara stepped forward. "No, you're the survivors." The alien turned its gaze toward her. A long silence. Then, for the first time in history, one of the Forsaken spoke to one of their own. "Ziara of the Lost, you have done what no one before you could." They gestured toward the galaxy map in the background, where thousands of signals blinked like distant stars. "You have woken the dead, the end of Earth's reign." Ethan barely had time to process it all before a second alert blared through the cockpit. Another fleet had arrived. But this time, it wasn't the Forsaken. It was Earth's warships. Hundreds of them. Ethan's stomach twisted. Ziara's grip tightened on the console. The Forsaken commander watched the screen, unreadable. Then they spoke calmly. "Your people have come to silence the truth." Ziara exhaled sharply. "Then they're too late." The Forsaken turned to Ethan now. "What will you do, human?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't taking orders. For the first time, he had to choose a side, not out of duty, but out of truth. He turned to Ziara. Then, slowly, he turned back to the Forsaken. And he made his choice. We fight. The battle begins. Earth's warships opened fire first. The void erupted into chaos. The Forsaken's ships, though ancient, moved like predators, dodging the first wave of attacks with unnatural precision. Ziara's ship jolted forward, joining the fight. "You sure about this, human?" Ethan smirked. Not even a little. He grabbed the weapon's controls. And for the first time in 10 years, he fought against his own people. The fall of an empire. The battle raged on. Forsaken ships weaved between Earth's fleets, disabling warships with energy pulses that scrambled their systems. Ziara's ship twisted through the chaos, dodging plasma fire, striking back harder. And Ethan, for the first time, he fought for something that mattered. For the truth, for justice, for the people he had once erased. And then, the turning point came. The Forsaken activated their final weapon. A pulse of light swept across the battlefield, not destroying ships, but shutting down their systems completely. Within seconds, Earth's fleet was helpless. Their weapons dead, their engines useless. The war was over. Ethan leaned back in his seat, heart pounding. Holy hell! Ziara watched as the last Earth ship drifted, powerless. Then she turned to the Forsaken commander. "What now?" she asked. The alien's glowing eyes softened. "Now, the galaxy decides what to do with those who tried to erase the past. The end, or the beginning." Hours later, Ethan stood on the bridge of the Forsaken's flagship. He looked down at Earth, his home, a planet that had tried to bury the truth. And now the whole galaxy knew what they had done. Ziara stepped beside him. She didn't smile, but for the first time, she didn't look at him with hate either. "Not bad, human," she muttered. Ethan exhaled. So what happens now? She turned toward the stars and whispered, "Now we see who survives the new world." The final lines. As the Forsaken ships prepared to deliver justice, as Earth's leaders faced the truth they could no longer hide, as Ethan and Zara stood, watching history unfold, one final message came through the comms. A transmission from deep space. A warning. You woke us up, but we were not the only ones buried. Something else is coming. And then, static. Ethan turned to Zara. She raised an eyebrow. Looks like you're gonna hate the next part of this story too. Ethan groaned. I really hate cliffhangers. The end, or the beginning of something greater. Final moments breakdown. Earth's empire is over. Their crimes are exposed, and they've lost control. The Forsaken have returned, and they won't be ignored ever again. Ethan and Zara's uneasy alliance is solidified. They're no longer enemies. A new threat lurks in the unknown, something even the Forsaken fear.